Have you ever noticed how so many of your emotions are wired towards impressing other people and being accepted by other people and fitting in? I just want to fit in. I don't want to feel like a loner. I want to do things that make me cool and make me come across as confident, and then I want people to accept me for who I am and respect me as the alpha Chad Ubermensch. I want to walk in and be like, I've changed my name to Steph the Ubermensch. I'm now an alpha Chad. Thou shalt respect me. And then they all go, yes, I expect you. I validate you. I accept you. You are what you describe yourself as. Pat on the head. You're the man. By the way, here's my girlfriend. You can just take her. I don't need her anymore. The real man has walked in. Thank you very much. All of our emotions are wired towards getting this validation off people, getting this type of respect off people. And we do incredible things to achieve this. Men throughout history would fight in wars so that they could get an honorable name. Men would go out and they would, nowadays they fight in bars, they fight in UFC, they do all sorts of things in order to get respect. They do crazy things to prove themselves. And you'll notice some of the funny, crazy things that you do in order to get this stuff in order. I remember being in groups of people when I was younger, and obviously drugs would show up when you're a teen, and we would like there would be this sort of unwritten competition where whoever could take the heaviest dose of drugs is like the coolest. It's like a kind of aspect of respect. So you go out and among men you fight, and whoever's the best fighter gets the most respect. Whoever proves himself as the most courageous and ballsy gets the most respect. And then there's this sort of energy around drugs as well. You take this heavy dose and it's like, whoa, that guy can handle a lot. That guy is not afraid of like taking these crazy risks. And you'd see that person as in some sense cooler than you can imagine, just than normal, just because they have that balls inside of them. They prove this virtue inside of them that they're able to do this stuff. And of course, what would drive a young man to do something like idiotic, absolutely stupid, as to take a copious large amount of some type of psychoactive substance that could probably damage him, like, speed or cocaine, that could leave him psychotic or leave him with some type of heart issue? Why would he do this? Why would he risk an overdose just to impress his friends? The crazy things we do. You go out and you drive really fast and risk death just to impress your friends, just for people to think you're cool. And then even think about the relationship you might have towards doing things that might be morally wrong. You might have your conscience that would say to yourself, or maybe you shouldn't take these dirty, filthy chemicals. Maybe I shouldn't jam inside of myself some of that MDMA or whatever these weird chemicals are that are getting offered in these like teen parties and all this type of stuff. Maybe I shouldn't do this, but everybody looks at you and they look down at you and they see your hesitation and they would look at you and be like, all the cool people are taking the drug. It's like, are you afraid of blasting holes in your brain matter? Are you are you really that attached to the gray matter in your brain? Are you being like some type of, dork who's afraid of like hammering his brain matter with some type of strange chemical that just fizzles it all up and dissolves it up? Are you afraid of dissolving your brain and turning it into a limp jellyfish like the ones you find on the beach that you just prod? Are you actually not that cool? Are you actually really not that cool? And when this happens to you, this exact dialogue happens to you, what you do is you feel inside your body all this tension that we call peer pressure. Your body fills you full of cortisol and it basically says to you, look, bro, I don't care if they're telling you to jam a stick up your ass. I don't care if they're telling you to walk around butt naked and like pretend that you're a bird or something like this. I don't care what it is. These people are the tribe. These people are cool. These people are better than you, motherfucker. Just do what they say, all right? If they tell you to go kill some, like, I don't know, like, you just go out there and find the first person you can find and beat the living hell out of them, kill them, whatever it is, whatever they ask you to do. They're the gang. They're the in-group. They're the people with the status. They're the people who validate you. Just go do it. Don't ask questions, all right? This is what your emotions are screaming this from down below. And you there with your moral conundrum in your head, your rational, empathetic mind, your compassionate mind being like, I can't just beat people up in order to impress the gang. I can't just take fizzle chemicals. I can't take like experimental lab-made chemicals that will just fry my face off. I can't take this stuff just because people want me to do. That doesn't sound right at all. But instead your emotions say, no, just do it, man. Just fit in. All you need to do is fit in. Stop trying to be all this like perfect self-improve thing. Just fucking fit in. You want to fit in. That's all that matters here. You idiot. Stop having your own opinions. Reason. Throw that shit out the window. That's like school stuff. We don't need that shit here. Just fit in, do what they tell you. And your peer pressure can drive you to do incredible things, drive you to do the strangest things of all. You can even do things that damage yourself, put your life at risk, all for peer pressure, all to get the validation and respect of other people. Now, this relationship between the individual and the mob and the group, this is a very important relationship to explore because it leads to incredible consequences. I'm talking in the context of like high schoolers getting blasted on drugs and going out and beating the crap out of each other or taking risks when they're driving in cars. But the scope of what this means goes all the way up to the questions of religion, like Jesus Christ is actually representative of the great story of the West that actually explains and extrapolates upon this very simple dynamic and shows it in its naked form as the grandest story of all. And to really get into this, maybe we can think about what happens when people peer pressure you into doing stuff and the dangers of the mob, the dangers of the group, and how they can actually sort of form this secret conspiracy of negative behavior, dangerous behavior, irrational, unconscious behavior that can force and break the individual and put so much pressure on the individual that you sort of get trapped and forced to go along with what they say. And for example, with the whole peer pressure to take drugs and the peer pressure to get fucked up, as they would say, I always remember in school, there was like when all of this stuff would begin to show up around about like 16, and you're like, oh my God, there's drugs. I heard you shouldn't be taking these. And then people would take them, and you'd have some people who would take a lot of them and they get really fucked up. And then what would develop is this sort of humor around getting fucked up, getting blasted out of your mind. And it was like cool and funny to get really destroyed. And you'd use language like this: I was so destroyed Saturday night. I was so fucked up. I actually ruined myself on Saturday night. And there was this, the group of people who accepted this behavior, accepted this ritual, said, yes, take the chemicals that fizzle your brain out. Take this stuff. Take this illegal narcotic that comes up here. This is good. And this is funny. And this is accepted. And oh my God, look, this new guy that we peer pressured into taking this type of stuff, he's getting fucked up right now. He's on the couch and he doesn't really know what's going on. He's like staring around him with like goggle eyes, like being like, oh my God, what is happening to me? I'm experiencing levels to my consciousness I didn't know exist. And there would be like jokes that would reinforce this behavior and sort of suggest that this behavior is good because it's humorous, because it's funny, because it's not that serious. It's a hilarious thing that we don't take so serious. And then memes would build up around this that would support this behavior as well. And when you get involved with this crew, it's almost like an initiation. You get baptized into this crew of people who would do this ritual, do this behavior like taking drugs, and you would pick up the jokes and you would resonate and align with their humor, and you would pick up their memes, and you would sort of become one of them. And then you would start to adopt all this type of stuff, and you would in some sense delete your any sense of resistance that you had before the peer pressure moment. If they can get you to do the sort of introduction, initiation and ritual, you're in forever, because you pick up the memes and it's hard to go back, because in order for you to go back, you would have to start to change the tone. When people would laugh at people getting fucked up, you have to be like, no, this is a serious thing. This might be hurting his brain. This might be damaging his gray matter. How will he ever listen to Uberboy videos if he's just got a fizzle brain, if he's got a Swiss cheese brain from dropping pills? How is he ever going to be able to listen to the profound, intellectual, sophisticated, jargon-filled videos of Uberboy McSteff? How is he going to be able to listen to those videos if he goes and he drops a load of pills just to impress us? No, we should take this serious. You know what, guys? Maybe we should stop getting blasted on drugs. And maybe what we should start to do is do cooler things in life, such as get in incredible shape, get extremely handsome, get wealthy, get monetizable skills that allow us to assert our will upon the world, get well dressed, go out and, actually dominate and establish ourselves in a relative high status in the world. Let's become creative. Let's set up an artistic generation that produces loads of things, instead of a hedonistic generation just sits around and just blasts herself off whatever chemicals make us feel good and waste our time with a load of inconsequential, hedonistic, low productivity behaviors. Let's instead connect with our will to power, the energy that screams inside of us and allows us to release our energy. Let's connect with that and release that upon the world. How about this becomes what we are, instead of us turning into this group and this community of losers that peer pressure each other into self-destructive behaviors? How about we become a crew of Improvers. We want to become improvers. Being an improver is cool. I don't care what anybody says. I want to improve, and I'm sick of taking all these drugs. I'm sick of this whole crew that we've formed here. I'm sick of this ethos. I'm sick of this vibe. I want to change. I want to start going to the gym. I want to start eating more healthy. I want to get up in the morning. I don't want to be up till 7 a.m. every day, out of my mind and a stimulant of some sort. I want to get this stuff in order. I want sunlight. I want all these type of things. I want fresh air. I want a creative practice in the peak hours of the morning. I don't want to be lying in bed till 1 p.m. I want to be waking up and making stuff. That's what I want to see. Why can't we be like this? Why can't we have this type of energy? You would go in this rant. I know you would go in this rant, and your conscience would rip open your face and just scream out at them, and they would all be like stuck in shock. And what would happen is you would deliver, fire truths. You would intervene. You would call them all out and say things that are so true. Improving is cool. You would say that, and they'd be like, oh, they'd feel it. They'd be like Satan wriggling down, like, oh, he's got me right in the chest. You'd say that stuff. But the problem is that they're in this reality bubble all together, and they've got all these memes and all these jokes, and you're basically saying to them, you have to let go of all that. You have to let go of your personality, your identity, your character. You have to unwire all your emotions that you've wired to all these relationships and all these memes and all these jokes. And you have to come along with these new ideas that I'm saying. You have to come along with this new thing that I'm saying that's not like, not romantic, not an extreme, intense emotional experience. There's no initiation underneath it, no ritual or action to support it. And you're asking them to make this huge leap of faith to just buy into what you say. And the problem is that they're not going to do that. The mob doesn't want to do that. The vast majority of people don't have it in them to follow their conscience or their gut, because you didn't either. We all crumble at this hurdle so often. So what they would do is they would banish you. They would say, get the fuck out of this group if you don't like it. Or even worse, they would start to just turn on you. They would start to say, their minds would, it's like an immune system. Their minds would switch on and say, there's a problem. There's a guy who doesn't get it. There's a guy who's not all in with the crew. There's a guy who's messing up the vibe. We've created this zeitgeist, this reality bubble among us. And this guy is coming in and he wants to change the way we do things around here. He wants to do things that are new. He wants to go out and he wants to lift weights. He wants to get up early. He wants to produce things and become creative. He wants to become an artistic entity in this world. And he's going to start doing this stuff, and he's going to make us feel guilty. He's going to start shaming us and thinking that he's better than us because he's trying to improve. Instead, so what we're going to do is we're going to start to ostracize him, put him outside, shame him. When he drops these jokes, when he tries to fit in and be one of us, we're not going to let his jokes land. We're not going to find them funny just because he says them. Maybe they're very witty, they're very logical, very well constructed, very, very well articulated, orchestrated, left hemispheric, sequential, logical jokes that really just punch in all the important points that a joke needs to do. But we're not going to laugh at them. He's going to drop those jokes and we're going to be like, nah, bro, that's a shit joke. Actually, we might even say that. We'll just be like, nah, ha. We'll just do that. We'll just do that sort of thing where it's like limp, it's flaccid, there's no energy. We'll show him that we're uninterested. We'll act like a lover acting like a dead fish in the sack. We'll just give him the worst treatment possible. And we won't let him in. We'll slowly ostracize him and isolate him, and hopefully he'll just leave by himself. And if they even get more extreme, they might actually explicitly banish you and say, get the hell out. They identify you as an outsider and they get out of our crew, get out of our reality bubble. You're no longer cool. We don't like you. Ostracize. They might actually build up all this energy inside of them, and they might use you, because maybe there'll be all this tension in the group, and they might use you as the focal point to express that tension, and they will attack you. They'll find all these problems with you, and they'll release their negative energy upon you because you have now offended the group. And so finally they're able to grab onto their emotions, these emotions that we all have unconscious inside of ourselves: anger, frustrations, hates, difficulties you have with people, and you've just given them a reason to project all that hate upon you, and they will go for it. They'll be like, oh, you want to improve? And then blah, all the darkness comes out, all the negativity comes out, and they spit at you, they kick you out, they say no, they banish you, and they thrust you out of their reality as full as possible. Now, this dynamic, what you're seeing here, is so essential, because this war you are in with the mob is incredible when you see it in its scope. This was talked about by people like René Girard when they're talking about the concept of scapegoating and the relationship between the collective and the individual, and the struggle that we all go through in order to stand on our own feet and represent what what we believe is authentic and congruent and real. Think about the modern world now. You're out there in the world trying to, stand up to your conscience, and you might see that the collective has gone crazy from time to time. It's happened before. It happened in communist Russia. I'm sure it might happen again, where people just get a load of nonsense, or they pick up a load of memes. They pick up a shared reality bubble. And it might be the stupidest thing ever. Just like when you were kids, you were all just taking a shitload of fizzle chemicals because it was cool and fun. And it was this fun reality bubble to be a part of because everyone was doing it. But it wasn't smart. It wasn't rational. It wasn't productive for health. It wasn't even kind of cool in the context of how you see your life when you're older and actually winning and doing well. You see yourself as kind of like a pathetic, edgy teen. But you look back at that energy and you understand why you were locked into it, is because that's what people were doing. That's what the vibe was. And this behavior can be incredibly negative. Just like, for example, with the communist revolution, there's this big vibe where everybody's, getting in with this idea, well, we'll all just talk about equality, and it's the cool in-group bubble of memes, and it's just going to work out, and everything's just going to work out. Just instantiate the Bolshevik government, and it's all just going to work out. And all of a sudden, people just go along with this idea, and suddenly this Bolshevik government is not at all what they thought it was, and suddenly the Bolshevik government starts butchering and murdering everyone. It turns out to be an absolute disaster. The whole zeitgeist, the whole crew, the mob's ideas that they ostracize everybody for not believing in, this whole meme and this whole set of jokes and humor and insider perspective, this groupthink that was going on, it was actually insanity. It was madness. It was dangerous. It was, in some sense, you could say, evil. And you would have got banished for challenging against it. And then if you didn't challenge against it, eventually you would have got killed for not going all in with it and not joining the gang properly. And maybe you would have just got killed anyway because people were just enjoying killing people at that time. And so the great challenge for you, the great challenge for all of us, is how do we stand separate to this mob? How do we stand on our own feet and say to ourselves, we want to be true, we want to be authentic, we don't want to always have to buy into these groups and do these behaviors? And emotionally, psychologically, it's incredibly difficult to break free. And what we see in our religion, in the Western religion of Christianity, is the most profound symbol to represent this struggle. It is just amazing that we sit with Christ at in the center, in the throne of ourself, in the throne of our heart, and he sits and he represents the absolute answer to this problem and this question. He is a symbol of the man who stands up against the mob innocently and justified in his position, stands up against the mob and gets fully swallowed and destroyed and ripped apart and eradicated. And he symbolizes for us, he shows us the path that we, even God himself, had to go through this type of problem. We all have to go through this problem where if we want to be true to ourselves, and we want to be true to the energy, the divinity within us, and stand true to our conscience and the Holy Spirit that speaks within us, we're going to have to face this very serious problem at some point in our life. Like, you can think of this from the Jungian individuation thing. If you really want to be your own person, if you want to be a courageous hero, if you want to stand in your own feet, if you want to say to yourself that, like, how do I represent myself? At some point, you're going to have to choose your conscience over the mob. You're going to have to go through these experiences where you get banished, where you get ostracized, where you break rapport with the mob. And the scale and seriousness of what might happen there is pretty profound. Like, it can start in a very, very basic level where you lose all your friends when you're in high school, and that's hard enough as it is. But it can even escalate to points where, for example, you might get ostracized from society or lose your job or fully maybe even get imprisoned or something like this, unjustly imprisoned, just like Christ was. Or worse even still, just like Christ was, you could get killed or like have your life taken from you. Absolutely. And this stuff has happened often inside of history. And it shows us this very, very big and profound story of the problem, the ancient problem of, you could say, Christ versus the machine, Christ versus the system, Christ versus that mark of the beast 666, which is the sort of the pathological collective unconscious groupthink and the power and danger that it has to destroy your life and crush individuality out of you. And basically this monster that grows in every single society all the time, this big machine that is the groupthink of society, the mob, that intimidates us for staying true to our conscience. And it shows us that the archetypal challenge and story for us reaching the highest levels of conscious expression of who we authentically are, representing our conscience, representing the Holy Spirit, this is all wrapped around our ability and our readiness to stand up to the machine, the giant beast, the Leviathan that stands above us that could damage us and hurt us. And I want to talk to you about this today and look through history about all the ways that it is manifested. So let us comprehensively explore the story of Christ, the archetypal symbol that helps us represent a diverse array of problems that we face in the human condition. From the teenager who wants to improve, who confronts his drug-taking friends, his fizzle-brain friends, his sizzle-noggin friends, to all the way to the profound experiences of religious figures and martyrs and intellectuals and public activists and people who stand up against the system and tyranny, all the way down to the basic experiences you have when your friends all want to watch Netflix and you want to go out and actually go do things with your life. You're fighting against that and you're reliving the symbol of Christ. You versus the herd, you versus the mob, you versus the group thinking energy that peer pressures you into doing stupid things that you can see are wrong and you can see would spiral into something possibly evil and tyrannical if you were not careful. And there's this very great struggle. And the context that this rises up in is profound and fascinating. And Nietzsche actually talks about this in such a brilliant way that really, really allows you, as always, to see both sides of these so you can understand that this is more complicated than simple black and white stuff. So Nietzsche looks at the story of Christ and he sees that Jesus was born obviously in Judea. He was born a Jew and he was living in a society that had a system in place. And we modern sort of liberal Westerners, we instinctively sort of say, oh, fuck the system, or, oh, systems are oppressive, systems are bad, systems get in the way. And we assume then, of course, that, Christ was obviously the good guy fighting against the system. Of course, that's the situation. But Nietzsche points out elegantly that you have to think of these things from the perspective of evolution and nature and life and psychology. So why would life orchestrate within a group of people a framework, a system? Why would life give us inside of us biases and out-group pressures and in-group preferences? Why does life give us emotional pressures that we put on top of people to make everybody act the same? Because ultimately, the goal of life is to create higher organized systems all the time. So when you have like a single cell, that's great. An individual cell knocking about, that's awesome. Wiggling around in its little primordial soup, that's absolutely awesome. But when a big group of cells get all together and they all sacrifice their individuality for coordination among the group, the cells grow into a body, which becomes a more profound creature, which gives rise to, people like us. The same with things like fighting. You look at an army that has a load of really strong individuals, barbarians that are really good with the swords that run around a little bit disorganized. That's all great. That's all amazing. That's actually compelling to watch. These individuals might even be better characters in individual sense than the group. But when you come across an army that is sophisticated and organized, a non-barbarian army, a professional army like the Roman army that treats every legionnaire as a cell, an optimized cell that understands its place and operates under an extreme discipline so that it forms a coherent body together. These people, they might be shorter, they might not be as well fed, they might not be as sophisticated and talented with their skills, but they're often able to defeat these armies of strong barbarian individuals because they're more organized, they're better organized, they're better put together, they're better conducted, they've got virtues are born out of their sacrifice of their individuality. And of course, you must look at systems and structures and social structures the exact same way. Your friends organizing together to do a certain ritual is, in some sense, life expressing her way of doing things. If your friends got organized together and developed a set of memes and jokes based around, you're a loser if you don't improve, but you're a cool and a winner if you do improve, and you do things that are challenging and difficult that make you grow and improve, that would be a very, very good community to be in. That's the type of thing that you want to be in. People who have a pro-improver diet, that's exactly what you're looking for in this life. And when you look then at something like a religion, that's essentially what you're trying to hit there. When you're trying to construct a religion, you are actually trying to create an oppressive, tyrannical system. You're trying to create an orchestration of social and emotional bias among a large group of people that makes them makes them want to be improvers, do things that are healthy and make the nation and the people survive and win and thrive and do well. And you want them to be angry and mean and nasty towards things that make the nation and the people do badly and make people fall. You want to get them to develop, memes and jokes and ways of seeing things that are good and healthy and allow life to flourish through the people, through the nation. And so the great struggle for the Jews is that they were originally like Israel. And then Israel got conquered by the Assyrians. The Jews went to Babylon, and basically Nietzsche said that the nation got ripped apart. And most nations would have, they'd have kings, and then they'd have warriors, and then they'd have farmers, and then they'd have priests and all this type of stuff. But what happened to the Jews is that they basically lost the warriors, they lost the kings, they got destroyed and killed. The warriors all got killed, the farmers and all that, they all got killed as well. And so all that was really left with the Jews was this, hodgepodge of people who were priests, this set of people who were able to like really, really good with intellectual stuff, and they were very, very like religious men and men of the book as we understand them. And they got back to Judea. There was this big, long, complicated historical story, and basically they were trying to run society. So there's this sort of group of elders that were sitting up in the high level synagogues in Judea, and their job was that they're basically the guys who run the system. They're the guys who sit down and say to themselves, are the things that we are doing promoting the health of the Jews? Are they promoting the health and the success and the victories of the Jews? And how do we create a sort of social pressure? How do we create a peer pressure energy so that if people do things that are not healthy, we can bully them and ostracize them? And it's almost like it's an automatic process. You install into the people's worldview from youth to see these things as taboo and negative and bad and not cool and worth ostracizing, and maybe you even punish them harshly. And this is good. So, for example, if a woman is adulterous, if she betrays her husband, she gets stoned. You have that type of taboo built into things. If a man is betrays or blasphemes the Lord, he gets punished. He gets punished harshly, so that keeps order in place and doesn't get any arrogant individuals to think that they're better than things. And so what we have here is the Jews trying to organize a way of seeing the world, a set of taboos. They're actually pro peer pressure that gets people to do healthy, proper things. They're crafting and creating a zeitgeist. Now, what happens is that the Jews are conquered by the Romans, and the Romans, they dominate them. They come in and they establish a Roman Empire, and they put up all the eagles all around. They say Zeus is awesome, Jupiter is awesome, and Yahweh, cool guy. Like you can worship him there in the corner, but Jupiter's the big guy because we beat you, and just accept it, deal with it, all right? And what begins to stir up, which is very, very natural, is the Jews want to set themselves free. They want to rebel against this Roman rule. And so the elder Jews are sitting around, and they're constantly sort of saying to themselves, they think this, they feel it just as much as anybody. Do you know what would be healthy for our people? Freedom. Do you know what would be healthy for our people? To get these fucking Romans off our back, to beat these Romans. These Romans aren't good. I don't like these Romans at all. And so they're inside the nation and inside the elders, there's always this thought about how can we break free from these people who are over us, that have grafted themselves upon us. And what happens is these elders, they're sort of their ability to create these taboos and all this and this orchestration, this organization, they might begin to use it. They might begin to maybe even intentionally use it to bend the people towards their goals. They might even try to use this to craft the people into a revolutionary spirit and revolutionary energy so that they can exact power against the Romans. And this is precisely what happened after Jesus' life. There was this constant buildup of energy, and the elders are trying to organize this energy and keep it, maybe a little bit under wraps so the Romans don't get too suspicious, but they're trying to focus it and tame it and discipline it so that it's potent and powerful and able to strike a winning blow against the Romans at the right time. And so what these guys do is they sort of begin to manage the religion. They manage the way that the taboos and the way that people see things, and they manage the ways the categories are sorted out. They begin to orchestrate and control things and how they work. Now, this is, again, what is quite fascinating about this, because as I said, a single cell, an individual cell, breaks into a higher organized body. And the same thing actually happens in societies with religions. So, for example, in Judea, you have all these individual people. But what a religion is, as I said, an organizational system that allows all these individuals to work as one unit. Okay, that's actually so fascinating when you really think about it. The religion keeps everybody working together towards the same ideals, which makes them effective. That's just like an army. Now, the actual substance, the actual nitty-gritty technical details of how that is done is even cooler as well. What you have in your body is you have a brain, and the brain wires all the rest of the cells with nerves. Your nervous system runs all through your body and touches all your cells. And so when the brain says something, it shoots this electricity down, and it makes your muscles cramp and do all these sorts of things. So you've been wired with this, hardware that runs all through your body that allows you to use your body. It gives your brain authority and command over the rest of your body. Your ability to control your body is dictated on this set of wiring and hardware that has been laid all around your cells. And all your cells are in some sense subjugated. They are cucked. They've been bitched by your brain. Your brain now has overpowered and overcome the cells and the matter in your body, and it can decide to tell them what to do. The same systems, the same archetype is actually present in all societies. It's present in all nations. So what you see in Judea is you have the synagogue, the elders, and out of this comes all these tentacles that lead towards the little individual synagogues that are in each neighborhood. And in these synagogues are almost like, nerve endings. And all the cells have been socially tabooed to always show up to these synagogues every single week. I think might be Saturday's the Sabbath. I don't know the Jewish holidays too well, but they show up. They're supposed to show up every day, I'd imagine. So the cells have been trained over many, many years that it's really impious, it's really wrong, it's really bad. You will get socially ostracized if you don't show up every day to synagogue. And when you show up to synagogue, what's inside of there is this very interesting character, like a very interesting cell that spreads out memes and spreads out humor and spreads out the zeitgeist and the bubble and the perspective. He tells the other cells what to think and what to do. He's literally spreading this information out. And in these rabbis, they go back and they talk to the head rabbis, the elders, and these guys all come together and they all make these decisions about what to do. And so you have a very sophisticated body. So when these small group of elders make a decision, they say, all right, we've got to change this story here. Maybe we got to add a little bit of anti-Roman sentiment in here. And we got to kind of talk about taking that part of the Bible or the Torah and reframing it this way and talking about it this way. And then these rabbis would go out and they go to the synagogue and they tell it to all the other Jews. And then the Jews come out and they're like, oh, that's an interesting story, and they're sort of programmed. And what's actually fascinating about this is because, of course, as you understand, all those individuals who go to synagogue, they would hear this stuff, and generally speaking, they're going to go along with it, because if they didn't, they would actually bring the force and the taboo and the bad energy and the accusations of blasphemy of the rabbis, of these powerful people who are able to control large amounts of, the large mobs, and probably quite a lot of muscle as well, because they know everybody into society. These well-connected people that are the authorities and the rulers in society, the rulers of the social order in society. And so if you want to actually, you see these guys coming in and changing the way that you interpret the Torah, and they are starting to suggest revolutionary spirits, and they're bending the religious texts to suit their will, you would start to, you maybe get suspicious about this, but you'd be terrified because it's a peer pressure thing. It crushes you and makes you feel awful. And you'd sort of say, you know what? Not my fight. I'm going to shut up here. Your conscience might ping and be like, that's not what that part of the Torah says. I remember reading that before. I remember my old rabbi used to say this, but you'd shut up. You'd be quiet because you don't want to get in trouble. You don't want to be the guy who has all the fingers pointed at you. Sometimes people get stoned for saying the wrong thing. Imagine if you got accused of blasphemy. What if people stop doing business with you? These are very, very serious things, and you got kids to take care of. So you know what? You may as well just go along to get along, that type of thing. Now, what happens with Jesus is Jesus shows up. And Jesus is, of course, the man with the conscience. Jesus is the man who makes this decision. And he says, I'm going to completely be congruent with my conscience. No matter what my conscience tells me, I'm going to let it lead me to an absolute sense. And the story, of course, is that he is God, and he comes down and he says, what I'm going to do this drama for you. I'm going to do the thing that I want you to do. I'm going to completely be congruent with my conscience. I'm going to come down and pretend to be one of yous. I'm going to pretend to be a man like all of yous. And I'm going to completely live fully. Every time my conscience says me, I'm going to be like a robot. Yes, conscience, I will do it. And I will take every punishment that is possible. I will take, if they kill me, so be it. I'll go with it. I'm not going to break at any point. I will go all the way through. This is the game. This is the deal. And I'll show you that I know it sucks. I know it sucks to get persecuted by these mobs that we set up. And I'll show you that I'm able to do it with you. I'm able to do it as well. Very, very interesting story. And so Jesus comes down and he says, yep, I'm fully conscience guy. Whatever my conscience says, I'll do it. And he comes down, and of course he hears this stuff going on, and he sees among the Jews, he sees this sort of revolutionary energy building up, and he sees they begin to bend the Torah and stuff like this, and they begin to bend these categories to suit their will. And no longer is this sort of, you could say, soulful perspective of what the religion is about. The religion is about raising the ideals and the energy of the broader individuals to bring out excellence in them so that they raise their standards and through that create a powerful culture that cannot be ruled by the Romans. Instead, there's this resentful energy being building up there where they want to fight against the Romans, they want to attack the Romans. And Jesus feels this building up inside of him. He notices this coming off the rabbis and he doesn't like it. He doesn't like it at all. His conscience says to him, this is not right. These guys are trying to break away. These guys are trying to go their own path and they're trying to be snakes. They're trying to bend knowledge. They're trying to bend wisdom. They're trying to bend God's word to suit themselves. They're making this whole religion thing, they're making it political. And I don't like that one bit at all. There's something a little bit off about that. This is the temple of my Father, and it's been turned into something that I do not quite like at all. And so he begins to stake his ground a little bit. He goes around, he shows people that he's the real deal. He's got all these healing powers, but he begins to sort of assert back when the rabbis come up and they accuse him of being a weirdo. They accuse him of like, what are you doing? Like putting spirits inside pigs and stuff like this. He says, what are you doing? Getting everyone drunk by telling them they're drinking water and then changing it to wine last minute and giggling in the corner as they get hammered. Like, what are you doing with this? What's this all about, Big J? What's your whole game going on here? And he always calls them out. You read the Bible and the rabbis are always like trying to catch him out and be like, you're a fraud, you're a fake, you don't know anything about the scriptures and all this. And Jesus always catches them out. He's always too witty, he's always too sharp. He knows what he's talking about because he can see what's going on. These guys are trying to bend this Torah to suit their political aim, their aim, their goals. And of course you have to understand why they're doing that, because they're trying to orchestrate a situation where they can solve this Rome problem in quite a serious way. Now Jesus turns around and says, listen, I know you're probably getting mad at me, but I'm telling you, this temple, this big thing that we respect, this big religion that we have, this temple is almost like the brain of this big nervous system that we're talking about being built inside Judea. Guys, if you piss the Romans off, like you're not in a position where you're going to be able to beat them. If you keep on going down this path, this temple is going to get knocked out. This temple is going to get destroyed. This whole Judea that we have here, it's over. It's done. You've lost. Like you're going to screw this up, right? Look, God, Yahweh, is pretty clear. Stick to his plan and he'll sort you out. Now, right now, you're going for your plan. And I don't think that's a good idea at all. You're betraying your conscience for your plan. And what happens is, over time, Jesus constantly stands up against this, asserts and says, my conscience is not incongruent with this. I don't like what's going on. This looks like the mob is spiraling into a bad mistake. I don't like it. I disagree. I'm going to stand against this. Eventually, what happens is he begins to isolate himself and clearly mark himself as a problem. And it's almost like the nervous system, the brain, the elders and all the rabbis, it's like a nervous system feeling out through all the cells. And they start to feel this one cell that is poking back, that is hurting, that's causing problems, that's calling them out, that's rebelling. And so what they do is they turn it, it's like an immune system. They categorize, like the T cells, they categorize what it is and they say, oh, that's a foreign entity. That's someone who's not in with the crew. That's someone who's not down. That's someone who's not bending to the peer pressure. That's someone who thinks they're better than us. That's someone who's trying to break free from the memes. They're trying to break the zeitgeist and break the reality tunnel. And basically what begins to happen is the nervous system turns against this till eventually the brain itself, the elders, they decide, get that guy. We're going to make an example of this guy. We're going to punish this guy hard. We're going to extract and puke out and destroy. We're going to get the immune system to come in on top of this and annihilate this entity, this Jesus. And so what they do is they take him out and they have him humiliated and beaten. They destroy him. They stick him up on the cross. They get the Romans to do it, and they use the power of the Roman authority to make sure that all this stuff happens. They get him nailed up to a cross and they have him destroyed. And this is actually, it sounds dark, but this is actually a very logical thing for someone like this to do, for a nervous system like this to do, for an entity like this to do. They're trying to show and scare off any other possible cells that will get any big ideas and resist their command. They're trying to stay organized by really scaring the outsiders, really socially shaming and ostracizing the outsiders. And this becomes a massive problem because it turns out that Jesus was correct in the end. Rome gets really pissed off when the Jews begin to rebel and they begin to go down this direction. And eventually there's this massive war, which ends up in Judea being annihilated from the map and turned into Palestine. And of course, now is literally like only in the last 70 years has that been corrected. So for 2,000 years, it was Palestine. And now Israel is back and there's this big Israel-Palestine thing. But that's how old this history is. And this is how interesting this history is, because this whole moment where Christ showed up, he began to talk to the Jews about these issues, asserted his conscience about these issues, got killed because of these issues. You see history then moves on with a very, very interesting drama that follows from this. These things are very, very interesting and important. And following the how the Jews stayed organized while they're dispersed all across the nations of the world is a profound thing as well. It's actually, Nietzsche would point it out, it's a joyful and amazing thing to look at. It's very, very intelligent what was going on with them. They were able to keep a coherent identity and culture that allowed them, 2,000 years later, to pull themselves all back to Israel again. The story held them together. The nervous system was actually still intact despite the body being destroyed. A very, very fascinating thing. Now, what happens with Jesus is he gets killed, he gets destroyed. But what's interesting, and this is a weird thing, is that the other cells see this. The other cells see this, and so they start to pick up his story. They pick up his story, and they see, all right, well, this Jesus guy, like my conscience kind of says the same thing. And the cells start to get a mind of their own, and they start to identify and sort of say, yeah, like I'm kind of on board with this Jesus guy. Like just Jesus guy represents the right way to go. And he's given me the courage to stand up against the rabbis. And suddenly there's like all this inflammation coming out of the body, and suddenly there's a lot of shaky problems, and suddenly the elders have to go around and categorize these new characters as Christians and go and start to persecute them. And there's some stories, for example, the Christian martyrs. Saint Stephen is one of the first ones to really stand up against this stuff. He was one of the first followers to get killed, and he calls them all out. He calls out the elders. He calls out the courts. He says it's all baloney. This is all madness that's going in the wrong direction, and you're now persecuting people. Allow me to get a drink. I mentioned Saint Stephen, and he's my namesake, and so I get emotional. That's what's happening. But he gets murdered. He gets stoned to death for blasphemy, for screwing up the coherency and the order of this system that has been built in Judea. And what the Christians begin to feel is that there's this horrific beast-like entity, this system that is oppressing their ability to be congruent with their conscience. And this, again, represents this old, ancient, dramatic problem. We have on one side the sort of Christ entity, your own conscience, your need to be congruent with yourself. The problem that Jung would tell us, that you'll never really individuate and believe in yourself and trust yourself and feel good about yourself if you betray your conscience. In order for you to be a real person, to have a soul, to have a sense of yourself, you're going to have to stand congruent with your conscience. And the whole other problem where life and the way that life works is that she needs to create higher orders, and operant within your society is these nervous systems, these ways of thing orchestrating that allows the mob to be coherent, that allows the masses to be coherent, that ultimately leads in a zeitgeist, a reality bubble, a set of memes that are accepted and a set of taboos, and your individuality has to fit within that framework, or else it's not really permitted at all. And if your conscience begins to go against that, you're going to get the force of the entire society against you. You will get taken out by, armies of men who will take you out and stone you to death. Stuff like this can happen to you. You can get publicly executed. You're one guy and you're not going to be able to beat an entire police force. You're not going to be able to beat an entire army. And it's a very, very difficult tragedy, because in some sense you have to understand why that happens. There is nobility and congruence towards these systems being put together. Society needs these, because if you don't have these, then a society with one of these will conquer you. Same with an army. You want individual warrior energy, but an army that is more organized will just conquer all your warriors, take all your women, and take all your stuff, and then you'll have no warriors. So it's better to win than it is to be free. Now, this is also a problem with us. We want to be individual. We want to have this conscience, but we also can't look at something like the hierarchy and orchestration of these nervous systems and disrespect them and think that we're better than them, think that we're above them. Now, what is fascinating is how this archetype, this drama between Christ and Judea, then goes on to play out throughout history, leading us up to the modern day, that allows us to actually see these patterns appearing in our modern world. What sort of system, what sort of infrastructure, what sort of nervous system has formed, and how does it oppress us? How does it put pressure on our individuality? And how do our consciences clash up against that? And what is our role in facing this? Are we supposed to stand and actually assert ourselves against this and do dangerous things like saying that we're going to rebel against the modern world? Now, this meaningless drama in Judea is actually the thing that changes the whole face of the planet in the most profound way you can imagine. This tiny little irrelevant character, Jesus, who inspires a movement that causes a large amount of the cells in the nation of Judea to begin to rebel against the central nervous system and immune system that had been orchestrated and managed and developed by these rabbis and the Pharisees. They begin to get rejected and killed and destroyed inside of them, inside of their body, and spat out of the body. Like the way when you get a virus, you begin to sneeze, you sneeze out the virus out of yourself. You're trying to get rid of this infection, this disease that's filling you up and destroying your body. And so the Jews reject them. They say, we don't want this. And then they go on their path to fight the Romans and they lose. But of course, the Christians are sneezed into Rome, and they actually begin to go into the Roman nervous system, because Rome had a sophisticated religion in place and they had a sophisticated political system, and the Christians begin to work their way into the Roman nervous system and actually eventually take over. Of all things, the Christians, with their tiny little story about this guy with his conscience standing up against this oppressive regime, actually goes in and manages to persuade and twist and coerce enough people to allow the Roman Empire to be shifted over, and the entire brain of the Roman Empire to change its identity from being pagan Roman or Hellenistic Roman. It changes its identity and the entire orchestration of all the cells in the body to be Christian. It changes everything. And all of a sudden, this guy, Christ, and in this irrelevant, backwater of the Roman Empire, is suddenly the leader of the largest empire in the known world, the most prestigious empire in the known world. He is the king of all kings, an incredible position to find himself in. He is the centralized figure of the nervous system of the biggest empire on earth. Imagine that. Now, what begins to happen is Rome is then set up as what we call the Catholic Church. Catholic means universal church. This is a profound new innovation that actually takes many inspirations from both the Romans and, of course, the ways that Judea ran these nervous systems. And you have very, very similar things where you have these little things called churches with a priest inside of them, and they preach the book, so they stick to the script and they put out the words in the book into the heads of all the congregation, the people who congregate, and they stick all of these churches all around villages, and then everybody is encouraged to show up to church as much as possible and do things like confession, and it's all wired back. All these churches are connected via the priest, like little neurotransmitters connected back to the nervous system and the larger brain, and the brain sits in Rome, and this is the Pope, and they all get together in their high council, the Roman Pope and all the bishops, and they decide what to think about things, what's the way to see the world. They formulate and create this very, very sophisticated zeitgeist, this very, very sophisticated organizational structure that allows them to control, obviously, Rome. But of course, what is so successful about the Catholic Church is that it's very good at expanding, and it goes far beyond Rome. It expands all the way into France, England, Germany, Ireland, Sweden, Russia. It takes over the whole of Europe. It takes over all of this stuff, and it wires far beyond just Judea. The Catholic Church becomes this nervous system, this brain that goes all across this massive piece of land and wraps it up and organizes it all together, which is an incredibly sophisticated thing. Nietzsche, for example, would say this. There's many downsides to Christianity that he saw, and we'll talk about that in a second, but there was many profound upsides. This, for example, gave the Europeans an ability to be organized together, sophisticated and organized together, because the Catholic Church is like a brain placed even over the nations and the kings. This allowed them to do stuff like gather, for example, several national armies and mix them all up together and form a crusade army that they could send out to attack the Muslims and stuff like this. Would stuff like that necessarily have been possible before? Maybe not. It's quite interesting to look at this. So this is an incredibly sophisticated organizational structure based on this new Christianity thing, this Catholicism thing that's very prestigious and very interesting and very big. The first sort of globalist empire, if you will. And if you were living back there, you might have felt like some type of, if you weren't into this Christian church, you might have been, a native pagan living in Germany or Ireland or England or France or something like this. And this new church comes along, this globalist new way of doing things shows up, and they plop this church inside of your village, and they start to shame everybody, put all this peer pressure, and they might even show up in an army, as they often did, to force you to start going to this church, and they would start to ostracize you, and you would find yourself, of all things, in the position sort of Christ did, where you're the outsider, and they have now this big system that they're building all around you, and there's nothing really you can do to stop it, and they're shaming you and pressuring you, maybe even murdering you, and to get on board with this set of memes, the Christian memes, or else you will get bullied and kicked out and ostracized from this new world order that was being established. You would be the dirty foreign invader, the foreign entity, the dirty, unwanted virus inside this new Catholic nervous system that was being created. In some sense, the word pagan, which is in some sense a slander word, was designed specifically to create that label that was quickly allow you to hate, quickly allow you to reject, quickly allow you to push out. It's like a joke, a disgusting slander that you spit at someone to say you are bad, you are evil, you are wrong, you're an outsider, you're banished. It would allow people to put pressure on these people to get out, and you're not welcome in this type of regard. And this was quite shocking for the pagans, because there would have been actually something that we would understand as religious tolerance present in Europe at the time. They would have said, all right, worship your Christ thing, but I think it's stupid. But Christians don't work that way. They would have been like, you either worship Christ or we have to take you down. We have to fight against you. We have to convert you. We have to prove to you that you're wrong. And sometimes we have to fight you to prove to you that you're wrong. And you see this actually quite a lot in the pagan scriptures that we still have from places like Ireland. There's these descriptions of these pagans walking in, sort of like, the individual looking at the mob, seeing the Christians, seeing this church where they're all bowing all as one to this one guy, telling them what to think. And it's like this kind of groupthink thing. And they're all scratching their noggin, being like, what the actual Sam hell is going on here? This is a strange thing. Who's this dead guy on a stick? Like, I don't really get what's going on here. Like, I don't like this at all. I don't like this at all. And despite them not liking it, Christianity won. Christianity was more sophisticated, more organized, more intelligent, understood better, and a bigger perspective. And it ended up winning out and destroying paganism, eradicating it from its native homelands, and establishing the Catholic world order, the Christian world order. And over time, this did incredible things. And as Nietzsche said, it might have reduced the individuality. It might have reduced the exceptional natural health of the Europeans. They're running around forests being like juicy, handsome lads with big muscles, chasing pigs. And suddenly they're grabbed and shoved inside monasteries to be these like nogginist book copers who listen to this weird old Italian guy who lives in Rome. But ultimately, it also gave powers that allowed all of Europe to get organized. Now, what happens is if you then try to go against Catholicism after this point, you're just screwed. You have to buy into Catholicism. You have to buy into Christianity in order for you to not be like Christ and get your worldview destroyed. Now, what is very, very fascinating is that eventually someone like Martin Luther shows up, and he basically does, of all things, he basically outframes Christianity. He outframes Catholicism, and he basically accuses the nervous system, the church, the Catholics, of not being Christian enough. His conscience begins to make him rebel against almost like the same archetype appears, where you have Martin Luther, who's like Jesus, listening to his conscience, fighting against the church, who is sort of turned into the Pharisees, this organizational structure that has lost its way, lost the way of the true church, and all these priests who, like unconscious NPCs, just go along with the Catholic Church, and they have lost their way, gone in the wrong direction, become tyrannical, become horrific, and Martin Luther comes up and he starts to rebel against them and assert himself against them and assert his individuality against this. And of course, again, this is where this old problem begins to show up again. Nietzsche talks about it quite clearly. We don't know what to make of this, because Martin Luther, in some sense, speaks to our romantic souls, where we want to be creative individuals who stands with our conscience no matter what and takes any punishment that will be dealt to us. And we want to stand up for the truth and assert ourselves. But at the same time, Nietzsche sort of points out Catholicism was going through the Renaissance at that time. It was reaching up to this cultural peak, and it was doing really, really well. The organizational structure had gotten to this point now where they were able to become massively creative. After 1,000 years of struggling out political systems and figuring out an identity and getting all this stuff right, we'd finally got to the point where Catholicism was producing a renaissance and this massive cultural movement. And then along comes some guy who thinks he's going to be a rebellious individual, who thinks he knows better than the hierarchy, who thinks he's better than the system, who thinks he's better than the beast, and he's going to go and stand on his own 2 feet and think he's a class guy, and pushes against this and just doesn't go along with the crowd and try to make the most of the system as it is, and make the most of the zeitgeist as it is. He's going to be ignorant and stubborn. And what happens is he screws the whole thing up, according to Nietzsche. He goes and creates Protestantism Protestantism, and then Europe is there and bickering about religious wars for eons afterwards, leading up to the modern world. And look, we'll kind of brush over that one briefly. It's an interesting way of looking at things, but this sets us up for the modern world in a profound way, because once the Protestants come along, this is sort of like Ion all over again. Once the Protestants come along, they open up that question of individuality, and it eventually destroys, it eventually wins. And the Catholics and the church over time loses its power and its hierarchy, and we have a new question showing up. Like what becomes pedestalized is the conscience and soul and romantic decisions of the individual. This becomes the great celebration that happens. And what's so strange about this is that in this time, this new nervous system begins to appear. This new set of hardware begins to happen. In some sense, the Catholics had their profound hardware of, the book, and then they had the churches and that type of infrastructure. But there's a new infrastructure growing in the last 150 years that is incredible, because of course the Protestant Revolution was driven by the printing press, the ability for people to distribute like a new hardware, a new nervous system for people to go beyond just churches being neurotransmitters. I can make a book and send it to everybody's house, and suddenly the brain is getting more tightly wired in Europe. It's a more complicated one where I can talk to every individual neurotransmitter. So instead of the church and everybody being a group thinker, each individual now I can speak to. Now this gets more advanced when we get into the modern age. This sort of anti-Christian age begins, and what happens is technology, the anti-Christian representation of Lucifer par excellence, technology appears, and all of a sudden we have televisions, radios, and of course these things showing up that begin to go even deeper than merely just in our house where we can get a book and we can sit down and read the book cope. What happens now is we have these little things that sit in front of our heads, literally like the connections in a neuron, and so me and it, my brain is like one side of the neural transmitter and this is the other side of the neuron, and we're flashing data in between us. It's sucking out all the data from me and giving it off to the strange elders who work at Google and Facebook, and I'm putting all this getting all this information and this dopamine out of this, and I'm drawing the juice out of it so that I feel good and get all the information off it that I want. And suddenly this new nervous system begins to form. You see television first, but now with the phones, now with the internet and all this type of stuff, it's the same sort of thing where these things here and the information on these now talk to us and tell us what to think. And you see it nowadays, the same sort of problems. People think that they're not religious anymore. People think that they're atheists. People think that they walk around and they think as individuals. But what's actually quite interesting is that whatever shows up prominently on here will influence people's thoughts to a large degree. This is like the new church. This has become the new place where we go. It's the new, and the priests inside of this who talk to us are sort of conditioning us to see what is the in-group, what is the reality bubble, the correct memes, the correct way of seeing things, what is taboo, what is not appropriate. And this is then, of course, creating the system of peer pressure. And all of a sudden, even though we think we're beyond religion and we're tolerant people and we're beyond bigotry, the same psychological archetypes and principles are ultimately present. And so what we have in place is nothing that is any different. We have religious thinking perfectly coherent and in place, because religious thinking is ultimately based on social group thinking or herd thinking. And there's nothing even wrong with that. That sounds like the thing you're supposed to say that's bad. No, that's perfectly normal. It's operant and existent in every single age. You're never going to defeat human nature and get rid of it. Stop with your libertarian nonsense. It's not going to happen. It's always going to be there. We're always going to think like groups. There's always going to be taboos. And the actual interesting question is, how do you make sure you have the right taboos? Can you become conscious of your taboos and explicitly state them as the right taboos? Because if you don't, what happens is you'll just, the process will happen by accident. It will happen with no control, and it might end up being very, very silly. As we said, it could turn into a communist revolution or turn into some type of weird culture that's not a lot of fun to be a part of, where you've got the stupidest taboos ever. And this is the question that we have for this modern world, because ultimately what has formed is all this hardware, all literal wires are showing up now in our houses, all around us, in our phones, and information. We're like a little synapse connected to this phone. They've got this rapid exchange of information, and all this information is flooding back to these these big technology companies, Google, Apple, Facebook, all this type of stuff, YouTube, and all this information is going back here. And among these, you have the sort of archons, the elders, the people who check out all this data and socially engineer, market basically based on what they see inside this data and make decisions based on what they see inside this data. And these people are sort of like the high priests of the world. They're the popes, they're the elders of the world. And they're making decisions based on all this stuff. And they're making very sophisticated and complex decisions. And what's quite interesting is that if you're an individual with a conscience, like the guy, like Jesus was in the temples back in Judea, if you're an individual with a conscience and you don't like what you see being promoted on these new synapses, if you don't like what you see operating in the culture, if you don't like this type of stuff, you're going to be in a very, very difficult position, because you're going to cross the taboos. You're going to poke in these religiously charged entities and problems and memes, and you're going to get banished and ostracized and pushed outside of it. And you're going to find yourself in the same place that Martin Luther, Jesus, the pagans, all of them found themselves, St. Stephen, they all found themselves in that position where if they went against the system, they found themselves getting punished in the most ruthless ways possible. Now, what's interesting is you might be punished by getting banned from social media, getting banned from getting censored, losing your ability to do financial things or something like this. Or just maybe your peers will turn around and see something you posted and turn on you and say you're an idiot and say you're not an expert. The Pharisees are the experts. The experts are the Pharisees. That's the archetype. And of course, the experts can, like, everything they say is correct, just like the priests were. It's not to do with truth. It's nothing to do with that stuff. It never was. It's all about what is said and what is expressed and what is seen as socially acceptable and socially valid. And if you try to, in some sense, jostle around this type of stuff or ask naughty questions or say things that are challenging and let your conscience run amok when it's getting outside the realm of safe play, you will get punished. You'll get punished harsh. You'll get ostracized, and you'll get an awful lot of pressure put upon you. And this sort of forms for us our very difficult problem. And it shows us a very interesting hidden myth, because maybe back in the past you could see the Catholic Church, so you could have a clear understanding, oh, that's the nervous system that is forming over us. I can see it, I understand it. Judea had the same thing. You could see the Pharisees, you could see this type of stuff. But our problem is that we don't see this. We don't see exactly what's going on. The phone is very innocuous. There's no a connector coming out of this. We don't understand what's going on, but we have this vague mythical conception, and it's ultimately a mythical entity that is forming. They're all flowing up towards this mechanical, invisible realm in the sky, the reality bubble created in the sky. It's almost like a new realm or new plane or new astral plane of some sort. And it's machina, it's the spider web of internet energy that's all conglomerating towards the sort of ego or consciousness or maybe unconsciousness of the current state of mankind. And among that, there's sort of archons who have incredible power over this, the experts or the rabbis or the high elders who get to decide how to interpret the data and get to decide what is the reality bubble that is permitted, and get to decide what are the taboos, and get to make these decisions about what is optimal for the health of our people, for the health of these nations. And in some sense, you must look at this. Are these people looking at merely just nations, or are they looking at the entire scope of the whole world? Is that how far this entire nervous system has spread? Has this gone beyond the Catholic Church? You start with Judea, you evolve into the Catholic Church, and now has this gone beyond that? And has this wired itself all over the entire world? Is this the massive new thing where you have this sort of centralized set of archons and elders who sit within Machina and are able to, if they say a certain meme or push a certain meme or suggest a certain meme, it will echo out through all the little jangling nerves and show up in front of all of our faces, and suddenly you will walk outside and all the people you will meet will be saying the memes that you just heard on the phone, and you're like, oh my god, it's almost like there's some type of programming happening or something like this. It's just all coming out very, very naturally. It's very, very fascinating and strange, and people start to lose their individuality in face of this, because of course they're just responding to the information they're given. It's like, do you even have a conscience? Do you even have a soul? Are you you even a person? You're just an NPC repeating the information that's been put inside of you. And this is the vast majority of people. And this has probably been the experience of the pagan who saw the Catholic Church show up, or it was the experience of Jesus trying to talk to the other Jews, or the experience of Martin Luther trying to talk to the Catholics. It's the same archetype again, the same problem that we struggle with. We are trapped with, we have socially and conditioned behavior, and peer pressure keeps the group solid. There's an evolutionary reason why that is. And we often, when our conscience goes against this, put ourselves in a very dangerous and difficult position. And what are we supposed to do in order to get this right? And what you see happen for us is a very, very big question about the challenge and stress of being a modern person and what it means to be an individual in a time like this, where the scope of this system, the size of this system, the scale of what we're looking at here is so big that it's almost dehumanizing. Like maybe with the Catholic Church, you could have an identity as a Christian, but now we've got to a point where the archons and their machine is so big that you barely get this identity. Like there's so many cells now that you're just sort of a human, or worse, you're a data point, a statistic, a little dot with no real individuality at all, no real value other than what can be fleeced out of you for a YouTube ad or something like this. So we'll talk about that now. How do you regain your individuality as an individual under this modern new system and nervous system that is forming? Now, this is a very complicated question, but the simplest, the most elegant way that you can look at it is by obviously sitting down and looking at what Christ did and understanding how to relive or re-understand or reinterpret his archetype in our modern context. This is the great big challenge. It's the reason why I'm telling this story, because, you know, Jung would say this quite clearly. He went through the Red Book, and that was like his version of going against the zeitgeist, going against the reality bubble. He had the peer pressure from the psychoanalysts, and he breaks free and goes his own way. And then he goes through the Red Book experience, which is like his passion, his ostracization, his loneliness. But he comes out on the other end as someone who stands on his own 2 feet and presents a new creative perspective. Now, this is exactly what Christ went through, standing in his own conscience, and he gets destroyed and punished for it. And you, in some sense, have that same problem. You are living among a group of people, like, and you're like this yourself, by the way. Like, you are programmed by this in all sorts of ways that you don't even understand still. And it's not like necessarily everything on that is maliciously programmed. It's just the way this nervous system has been working. It's an evolving entity with leaders, and of course with accidents happening inside of it as well. And you were born and you were plugged into the TV, you're conditioned via the TV, you're plugged into the school system, conditioned via the school system, plugged into the phone, then conditioned via the phone. And you come out at the end of that sort of shaped largely by this, shaped by the information that was put inside of you, shaped by all these type of things. Now, what's interesting is that you've got a nature, you've got a set of instincts, you've got a conscience. And this set of instincts and conscience, this is wiser and older than any of these nervous systems. Even 2,000 years of Catholicism is nothing compared to the ancientness of nature. Nature is, you know, billions of years old, as Jordan Peterson says. Lobsters' nervous systems are older than trees. And that's precisely true. And these deep ancient instincts and this deep ancient conscience know this, and they've seen a lot of stuff, man. They're an old veteran. They're smoking their cigarette, being like, I've seen a lot of shit, man. I've seen a lot of shit. And they know what matters. Nature and life and your instincts know what counts, know what's a big deal. And so when you're inside of one of these massive social nervous systems that might be putting a lot of peer pressure upon you, your nature will sort of have this hunch, this ability to know what's bullshit, this ability to know the stuff that's wrong. And sometimes maybe even this machina, this nervous system, might try to shove things down your throat that are just complete nonsense. But your conscience, your nature, and your spirit won't be able to digest that. You will be like, something in you will begin to push back. And in some sense, what will happen is some people will violate that life, the voice of life inside of them, violate that conscience, and they'll begin to get really, really screwed up. And they'll become, like you could say, Agent Smiths for machina, Agent Smiths in the Matrix, because they decide to betray their conscience and fully become an NPC, fully lose their, you could say, their soul, if you want to put it this way. But other people won't. And this happened in Russia, for example. Like by the end of the communist regime, the USSR, it just sort of burnt out because people just couldn't keep up with the bullshit. Like after a while, after 70 years, like it was just so obvious that it was just nonsense. It was just like, it's ridiculous. Like it's obviously scams, swindles, corruption, we are not all equal. Some animals are more equal than others. Like that just really got built into their hearts, and it developed a sort of skepticism inside the people that eventually just led to not taking it seriously. And suddenly the whole nervous system that had been constructed there just couldn't really hold itself together, and it implodes upon itself and turns into what modern Russia turned into now. And this is because there was a rebellion of the conscience, rebellion of nature. It just, over time, it just couldn't take this much stuff. Now, this is not necessarily to say that like a good thing can happen, because the poor Russians had to get butchered and attacked and assaulted and ripped apart for a long period of time in order for their nature to really kick into gear. But ultimately is there, and it's there in all of us as well. And what we see happening now in this modern world is we have an awful lot of problems where, a lot of people are alienated, a lot of people are lonely, a lot of people can't understand how to adapt to these new tools. They're brainwashed and controlled by all this information that is coming in. They're not really thinking for themselves. They feel isolated when they develop maybe a bit of a conscience or a bit of a nature that jars against what's kind of popular and common. But ultimately, you start to see that in some sense, if you see this machina and see it going in a horrible direction or an evil direction or a way that you don't agree with, your way that your conscience rebels against, and the suggestion by Christ, the suggestion from Jung, is that you have to stay congruent and stand your ground if you want to have a meaningful life. If the problem we all talk about is like, I'm a nihilist. It's a nihilistic age. I struggle with meaning. I struggle with purpose. Well, if you want a meaningful life, sit down and have the bravery to listen to your conscience, listen to your nature, listen to what your nature is telling you is bullshit, and figure out a way that you can begin to beautify that as much as you can, spiritualize that passion, and release that energy and these memes and these new ideas into this machine. It's almost like you're producing new memes into the machine. And over time, what this will do is this will either make the machine sick and have a viral flu and make you spit out and try to spit you out or something like that and create chaos, which will make the machine fragile. Or like what happened in Rome, the entire machine, you might get into the brain and infect the brain. The entire machine might change, and you can have a situation where someone like Christ is murdered, killed, destroyed. His body is destroyed, but the idea continues and actually takes over the nervous system itself. And this is very, very possible. In some sense, if you want a meaningful life, you would begin to look at how you could go down that path, how you can stay congruent with your conscience and begin to assert stuff which you believe is real and authentic in the face of a nervous system that can always be peer pressuring you into doing nonsense and silly stuff. Now, you're not going to be able to do this unless you have balls, unless you're brave, unless you're severe in the way you coordinate yourself and you're able to assert yourself upon the world. To follow through with your conscience, the ultimate problem is fear. That's the thing that challenges us most, because there's so much risk. Think about Christ's story. The problem with, like, he sits down in the garden before his death and he says, I am so afraid of the cup of suffering that is about to come. Please make me hold it with dignity, but I am terrified. And this is precisely the problem we all have, because to be congruent with your conscience, you need to have bravery. You need to be able to say, I'm going to take whatever risk this brings, whatever suffering and pain this brings, I'm going to take it. If this means my death, if this means losing everything, if this means getting ostracized from Makina, if this means getting the punishment of all my peers, the pressure of all my peers, I'm willing to take that conflict. I'm going to take these punches. I believe that I can take these punches and pick myself back up and keep going forward. And if you're able to have that courage and understand that you can take those risks and rebuild yourself despite failing, and then you can express your conscience, you're really on the right path towards living a meaningful life. If you want a meaningful life, you could probably have it tomorrow. If you started, it's almost like Bruce, what's the movie with Jim Carrey where it's like, he becomes yes man. He just says yes to everything. It's almost like that, but it's like conscience man, not as catchy, but basically you just let it out. You always say, all right, I'm going to stay congruent with this and actually connect with this, spend time working on myself to make sure that I'm releasing my true nature, I'm spiritualizing the passions so they're not like degenerate, fallen, lustful passions, but actually beautified and expressed in their highest standards possible, and then staying true to them to the very, very end. And you ask yourself, oh, I struggle. I wish I had a meaningful life. I wish I had a great, I wish there's a great war that we could pursue, or a great interesting spiritual time where we could pursue. Well, what if we were living underneath the slow grafting tentacles of Makina, and she was impregnated with a set of psychopathic archons, and all you had to do was wake up from the matrix, plug that thing out from yourself, and start to have the bravery to speak the truth, the magic words, the reality that you needed to do in order to create the energy that would actually turn this back in a good way. There's a big question. Now, the problem with most modern men, I find, is that they can't do this. It's very hard to do this. It is scary to do this. And so what you've got to do is you've got to ask yourself, well, how do I I overcome fear? How do I develop a sophisticated relationship with fear so that I can actually be this character I wish I was, who was congruent with my conscience? This is so my conscience wouldn't torture me as well. Well, this is the thing that I've noticed quite a lot from doing all this psychology stuff. I look through Joseph Campbell, I look through Jung, and I see constantly this sort of suggestion of this old ritual called initiation. And basically what initiation was, as I've said before, is it was a training in fear. It was a tool that you used to do where you take a ritual, you take a young boy, and it's almost like a sort of peer pressure thing. You take the young boy and you scare him and try to invoke in him massive amounts of fear and bully him into standing up and being brave and asserting himself against the fear. You push as hard as you can to make him stand up and become a man, to assert bravery. And then when you do that, you welcome him into the tribe. You say, you're one of us. You've done the ritual. Like those people who make you take all the drugs so you get fucked up. That's like an initiation. Their version of an initiation was they stimulate fear and make sure that you prove your bravery in the face of that. Because they understood deep ancient wisdom, deep ancient tribal wisdom, that they understood within the heart of a man that if you can't develop fear, there's no individuation for you. There's no further path for you. If you can't develop an ability to manage and deal with your own fear, if you can't prove to yourself that you're brave enough to stand up to fear, you're never going to be able to express your conscience. You're never going to be able to go on a hero's journey or any other path. You're never going to be able to become a man unless you do this. This is the foundation. And what I notice is such an elegant and simple thing is that modern society just has no initiation processes. None of this stuff. They never do this. You go into school and you're brainwashed by this, you're brainwashed by book cope, you're brainwashed by the teachers inside of there. You have all that information that's jammed in your brain. It doesn't give you an individuality. It turns you into a NPC, a cog, a information guy, a nogginist, but it never initiates you. It never introduces you to the experience of fear. So what I've done, and this is obviously related to the program if you want to check it out, is I've made a video that actually explains all this, a free video. I made a video that explains all of this and this process and the process of initiation and how it fits into the modern world. And I'll link it down below. And if you want to check it out, if you were interested in actually taking those first couple of steps towards asserting your conscience against Makina and her juicy, horrible ways and her conspiracy of archons, what you can do is check out that link in the description, give it a listen, see what you think, and I'll talk to you soon. You can then book a call after that if you actually want to come on board and hear more about this and maybe invoke these abilities in your life and actually begin what we call your individuation process and get you better able to manage your fear so you can develop these foundational tools that allow you to be more congruent with your conscience and push yourself towards a more purposeful and meaningful life. So if you're interested in all this, I'll talk to you. Check it all out. Links below. You know the spiel. Check out the links below. But I am going to call it a wrap there. I, again, really enjoyed this one. This is a set of big ideas that I've been mulling on for a while. I probably sound like an absolute madman. Absolute madman. This is going to be the ones where they're like, this guy is just, maybe he's talking about drugs at the start. Maybe he's on drugs. It's like, yeah, right, whatever. So look, I enjoyed this a lot. Thank you very much. And as I said, if you want to come work with me privately, if you want to go and work with me intimately, and I'll run you through everything I can do, the links in the description and the comments, you can just check out that video and book a call. I'll talk to you all later. Stay juicy, people. Bye-bye.